They say a single envelope can hold a lifetime. Mine arrived on a quiet Sunday in late autumn, the color of the backyard maples turning the sky into a stained glass window. I thought it was a scrap of homework or a thank you note. I was wrong. It was the kind of letter that takes your hand, sits you down, and makes you listen to a truth you didn't know you were starving for. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted chicken because I always overdo Sunday dinner. It's a habit I picked up from my mother. Feed people until their shoulders loosen and their laughs grow round and warm. My nephew, Eli, had texted earlier. Aunt Mara, I'll be there at 6. Can I bring anything? I told him to bring his appetite and that smile of his, the one that could make even January feel like a mild month. By 5:30, the table was set, the good dishes catching the last slant of light. I put on my soft sea green cardigan, the one my sister says makes my eyes look kinder, and turned on the radio so the living room would feel fuller than it really is. I've lived alone for a few years now, long enough to enjoy the hum of my own routines, but not so long that the silence doesn't occasionally sound like a question I can't answer. Eli arrived with a gust of chilly air and a bouquet of grocery store sunflowers. He's 22 now, taller than I remember every time, with a careful way of standing, like he's measuring the distance between him and the person he's talking to, trying to get it exactly right. He hugged me with that gentle squeeze that says, "I remember how you like to be held," and then he handed me the flowers in a folded piece of paper, the edges worried soft. For later, he murmured, eyes sliding away as he kicked off his shoes, "If you don't mind." "Of course," I said, slipping the paper into my cardigan pocket as if it were something fragile, a feather or a photograph, then steering him into the kitchen where the chicken rested under foil like a secret. We talked as we always do. The new project at his part-time job, his stubborn car, his mother, my sister, who works too hard and sleeps too little. He teased me about the extra bowl of mashed potatoes, and I teased him about the way he always divides his peas into tidy little borders on the plate. But there was a finch-like flutter to him that didn't match the conversation. An occasional far-off look, a sigh he swallowed. He kept touching his wristwatch, even though it wasn't new and didn't need admiring. I noticed because I know him, because I've watched him grow from a toddler who lined up crayons by shade to a young man who sees the world in careful gradients. We ate. The radio crooned old songs, the kind you can hum without meaning to. Eli cleaned his plate, but not his expression. I could almost see his thoughts stitching themselves into a shape he wasn't sure would hold. I refilled his glass, and a moment later the furnace clicked on with a comforting, steady breath that made the whole house seem to settle. "Walk?" I asked when we'd cleared the table. My neighborhood does its best thinking at dusk. He smiled, relieved to be invited into motion, and pulled on a jacket. Outside, the air smelled like dry leaves and chimney smoke. The sidewalks were scribbled with the day's last shadows, and a little wind threaded itself through the oaks, making a sound like a whispered apology. We turned down Maple Street, past the mailbox with the crooked flag, and the dog that likes to bark at nothing. Eli tucked his hands into his pockets. I tucked mine into my sleeves. We were quiet in the way people are when they're listening for the right beginning. "Aunt Mara," he said eventually, the words catching on my name like his shoe had caught on a crack. "Do you remember when I was 10 and you came to my school for that poetry night? I read the one about bridges." I laughed softly. The bridge that wasn't sure if it was a bridge or a boat. It wanted to carry people, but it also wanted to travel. You were very proud of that poem. He nodded, smiling at the memory, then glanced at me with something braver than pride, something tender and a little trembling. You told me afterward that sometimes the thing we are is also the thing we're becoming, that it's okay to be both for a while. I remembered. I remembered the auditorium smell of dust and pencil shavings, his ears pink with nerves, my hand on his shoulder. I meant it, I said. I still do. He exhaled, a small cloud that dissolved above us. Good, he murmured, because I wrote you something. That paper I gave you. I couldn't say it right, not out loud. Not yet, but I needed you to know. You always see me, even when I'm not sure how to see myself. We reached the corner where a streetlight flickered to life, ringing the sidewalk in a soft gold that made us look like we'd stepped into an old photograph. I could have opened the paper right there, under that forgiving glow, but it felt too public, too open-windowed. Some words deserve a roof. So we walked back, not speaking, our silence companionable, elastic. In the kitchen, I made tea because that's what I do when I'm steadying the moment. 2 mugs, one with the chip on the rim that I always keep for myself, the other with a faded blue stripe that used to match a set before life mismatched everything. Eli drifted to the window over the sink and watched the dark gather, the way a coat is gathered and buttoned against a chill. "Will you sit with me?" I asked. He nodded and followed me to the couch. The letter was worn from my pocket, creased and polite, as if it had practiced patience. I unfolded it slowly. The paper breathed. Aunt Mara, it began in his neat, careful handwriting. "If this finds you, it means I found a little courage." My throat tightened, not with fear, but with that ancient ache that rises when love recognizes itself. I kept reading. He told me about the version of himself he shows the world and the quieter version that waits for him at night, the one with doubts and hopes like jars on a shelf. He wrote about wanting to be trustworthy, kind, more present than he's been lately. He apologized for the times he dodged my questions and changed the subject. He confessed, not with shame but with honesty, that he felt lost this year, adrift between what he thought he should be and what kept tapping at his shoulder from the inside. He wrote about family, about feeling like our house was the one place where his thoughts didn't echo back at him too loudly. He thanked me for the bridge and boat story. He said he wanted to be the kind of man who could carry people and still keep moving, who could be solid and still learn. There was a line that cinched around my heart like a ribbon. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to keep doing that thing you do. Sit with me, even when I don't know the right words." I paused there and looked up. Ella's eyes were on his hands, thumbs working a nervous seam that didn't exist. I could see how much it had cost him to give me these sentences, and how much he hoped they would be received, and not merely read. I kept going. The letter was longer than it looked because it held more than ink. He talked about a friend he admired for being open about his own storms. He admitted he'd been afraid to say he was struggling, afraid it would change the way we saw him. He told me he'd started taking small walks on his lunch break, trying to notice one beautiful thing each day. A mural, a stray cat supervising a construction site, an elderly couple arguing affectionately about grapefruit. He wondered if noticing was a kind of prayer. He wondered if being gentle counts as being brave. When I reached the end, the words had settled over the room like a quilt. I folded the paper back along its original lines, the way you tuck a child into bed. For a moment, the only sound was the clock, earnest as always. "Thank you," I said, because gratitude seemed like the only honest beginning. "For trusting me with this, for letting me know where you are." I touched the edge of the letter. "I'm right here." His shoulders dropped, a visible unshouldering, and he let out a breath that trembled a little. "I didn't want to disappoint you. I smiled, soft and full. You've never disappointed me. You're a person, Eli. People don't disappoint by being real. They honor us. I set the letter on the coffee table, not away but near, like a guest who should hear the rest of the conversation. You don't have to be finished to be loved. He laughed, a brief, shy sound. You always have these lines, he said, gaze shining. Do they come with the cardigan? They come with living long enough to recycle what healed you, I answered. Then I reached for his hand, grown, strong, familiar, and gave it the kind of squeeze he'd given me at the door. Tell me what you need right now. He thought about it, eyes wandering to the bookshelf where the spines know everything I've kept. Maybe just dinner again next week, he said. And maybe, if I start to clam up, you could ask me a simple question. Not a big one. Something like, what was beautiful today? I think I could answer that. I can do that, I said. I like that question. I looked down at the letter, at the measured grace of each line, and for what it's worth, what was beautiful today for me was this. You, handing me a piece of your heart and trusting I wouldn't drop it. We sat there, both of us quiet, both of us taller somehow. The tea had cooled, but I didn't mind. Outside, a neighbor's porch light blinked on, and a moth began its faithful ballad. The furnace hummed again, and somewhere, faintly, the radio gave up a final chorus. Before Eli left, he stood in the doorway and turned, as if to say something more, then changed his mind and simply stepped forward to hug me. It was longer than our usual hug, steadier. The kind that says, I heard you hearing me. When the door closed behind him, the house wasn't emptier. It felt, strangely, like a bell that had just been rung, a clear note lingering in the air, proof of a sound made and received. I gathered the plates that were still drying by the sink, folded the dish towel, and returned to the couch. I read the letter again, slower, letting each word announce itself. It didn't ask me to become anyone new. It invited me to become more of who I've been practicing to be. A listener, a keeper of ordinary courage, the aunt who keeps the porch light on. I placed the letter back in my cardigan pocket, its warmth finding mine, and I understood that something had shifted inside me. Not a dramatic overturning, but a measured turning toward. The world outside went on being itself, leaf and light, clock and cup. But inside my chest, a door had opened between rooms that had needed each other for a long time. It was as if Eli had slipped that door's key into my hand with the paper. By the time I clicked off the lamp, the house had learned a new sound, the quiet certainty of love that doesn't need to announce itself to be real. I went to bed with my cardigan draped over the chair, the letter resting in its pocket like a heartbeat, and I promised the darkness something I could finally keep. I would keep asking about the beautiful thing, and I would keep making room for bridges that sometimes dream of being boats. The letter lived in my cardigan pocket all week, the paper softening where my thumb found it during quiet moments, between grocery aisles at red lights, while I waited for the kettle to sing. I didn't memorize the words so much as I let them walk around the house with me. They stood beside me as I folded laundry. They looked out the kitchen window while the sparrows argued over seeds. They made everything ordinary look a little more deliberate, as if the world had put its hand on my shoulder and said, "Pay attention." By the following Sunday, I had cooked too much again. Habit and hope are hard to portion. I set 2 plates, 2 folded napkins, and a small vase with last-leg sunflowers that insisted on being cheerful. When Eli came in, he hung his jacket with that same patient motion, as though he were careful not to disturb something invisible. His face had the well-rested brightness of someone who'd finally slept without bracing for a bad dream. What was beautiful today? I asked, not wasting the chance to make good on our new practice. He glanced toward the window, smiled to himself, and sat. A bus driver, he said. Stopped a little longer than usual so an older man could make it from the curb. No horn from the cars behind. People just allowed it. It felt like the city and the man and the driver all agreed to breathe together. Beautiful, I said, and it was. I'll match you one. A girl drawing hopscotch squares with chalk out front. She ran out of numbers and added a sky box at the end where she stood perfectly still, like standing still was the winning. We ate. He told me about a podcast he liked, stories of people who changed their mind and were better for it. He'd started listening on his lunch breaks, he said, while walking the block that circled his building. He'd been leaving his phone in his pocket to try noticing more. Yesterday it was a cat sunning itself on a bakery display, he said. Today the bus driver. Maybe tomorrow it'll be something tiny like the way a puddle holds a tree. It's silly. It's practice, I said. Silly is often how practice looks from the outside. When the plates were mostly empty and the tea steam had thinned to a silver thread, he reached into his bag and took out another folded paper. I've been writing a little each night. Not always a letter. Sometimes a paragraph. I don't know if you want to read all of it, but this part is for you. I held it, not opening it yet. Do you want me to read while you're here or later? He considered, then tapped the corner of the page with his index finger. Later, he said. But could we walk first? I want to show you something. We left the dishes to soak and stepped outside. The air had swapped the sharpness of last week for a softer chill, like the season had put on a sweater. We took the long way, past the mailbox with the crooked flag, and the tidy lawns that were gradually admitting defeat to fallen leaves. At the end of Sycamore, there's a pocket park with a bench that faces a small creek and a footbridge that promises more than it delivers, just a handful of planks and a simple railing. A sign says DUNTFEED, the DUCKS, even though the ducks look like they have an excellent lobbying team. Eli led me to the bridge and leaned his elbows on the railing, looking down at the water. I come here sometimes after work if the bus is early. I like that the water doesn't pretend to be a river. It just goes. We stood like that, not needing to talk, the way you might stand beside a friend in a gallery, letting the canvas do most of the explaining. After a moment, he took a small envelope from his jacket pocket, the kind that usually carries a single photograph. I brought you this. He offered it without flourish, and when I slid the photo out, I recognized my front steps. Late afternoon light, angled just so. The railing casting stripes like a quiet piano across the siding. On the top step, my chipped blue mug catching a square of sun. No people. Only the suggestion of them. Your porch, he said, softer now. From last Tuesday. I walked by after work, and it looked like a place that knows how to wait without getting impatient. I took the picture and thought, if home could be a sentence, it might be this. I swallowed, feeling something gentle and weighty move through my chest. It's beautiful, I said. You saw something I didn't know I was doing. He watched the water, shy under the compliment. I've been taking more photos. Not for anything. Just so I don't forget what the day tried to hand me. We found the bench, and he sat with his hands open on his knees, the picture between his palms. I could feel a change brewing, not a storm, exactly, but the kind of weather that asks you to consider closing a window. He took a breath, then another, like the space between them needed measuring. Mom called last night, he said finally. She asked about applications. You know, next steps. Law school, grad school, responsible directions. His smile went crooked, fond and wry. She was gentle about it, but I heard the clock in every question. I did too. My sister, who takes her love and irons it until the creases look like plans. What did you say? That I'm thinking. That I'm working and saving and making sure I don't rush into a costume I can't breathe in. He looked at me then, eyes bright but steady. I didn't say the rest. The rest, I repeated, giving him room. I want to change my major officially, he said, from pre-law to community arts and education. I want to learn how to use stories and pictures to help people feel less alone. I've been volunteering at the library on Wednesdays, helping with a little workshop for kids and a few older folks who come in to scan old photographs and write captions so their grandkids know who's who. It's the best part of my week. I come home and I feel, I don't know, lined up with myself. A wind troubled the creek's surface, and a few leaves let go of their branches without drama. I felt the familiar protective urge rise, the one that wanted to shield him from every sharp corner, to argue with a world that measures success in narrow ways. But another feeling arrived alongside it, calmer and more useful. Respect. He wasn't asking permission. He was letting me into the room where he kept his deciding. What are you afraid of? I asked, not to talk him out of the fear, to name it so it couldn't run the conversation from the dark. He released a breath. Disappointing, Mom. Wasting money. Choosing something I love and then finding out I loved a postcard of it and not the place. Or that I'm not good enough to do it for real with real people. That I'm just visiting a life that belongs to somebody braver. I nodded. Those are honest fears. They don't sound like stop signs. They sound like speed bumps. I touched the photograph again, the small rectangle warm from his hands. Does the idea of doing anything else make you feel like you're borrowing someone's shoes? He laughed, surprised. Exactly like that. They fit fine until I try to run. We sat with it. Ducks murmured a commentary that didn't require translation. A jogger passed, lifted a hand, kept going. Ellie's shoulders had that set I recognized, the one that appears when he's carrying something that is equal parts fragile and necessary. When you tell your mom, I said, do you want me to be there? His eyes jumped to mine and softened. Would you? She listens better when you're around. Not because you make my case, but because you make the room quieter. I can make a quiet room, I said. We can do Sunday dinner at my place, and you can say it after dessert. I'll save a slice of pie for courage. He smiled, then sobered. I wrote about it, he added, nodding to the paper in my pocket. I tried to say it in a way that didn't make it sound like a rejection of everything Mom gave me. Because it isn't. It's using what she gave me, turning it into something I can give. We walked back as the light thinned, both of us careful with the new truth as if it were a candle and the wind could get ideas. In the kitchen, I handed him a container of leftovers and a paper bag with 2 slices of pie. He hugged me, lighter on his feet now, and promised he'd text when he got home. After he left, the house folded its arms around the quiet again, familiar and kind. I washed the dishes, wiped the counters, set his photograph on the mantel. Only then did I sit on the couch and open the new letter. His handwriting had loosened, the lines more confident, as though his sentences were trusting the paper to catch them. Aunt Mara, it began. I'm writing from that bench near the creek, so the letter might smell like leaves if I'm lucky. I've been thinking about how every kindness I remember from childhood was a small thing at the time and an enormous thing later. The way you kept the car running warm in winter so I wouldn't sit in the cold when I forgot my hat. The way you never rushed me when I was choosing, and I mistook your patience for indifference, until I grew up and realized patience is the most active verb you owned. He wrote about the library, about the woman who brought a shoebox of photos and laughed with her whole face when the scanner lit up the picture of her wedding cake. He wrote about a kid who asked if old pictures ever get lonely, and how the room fell into a hush so wide you could hear every pencil, every zipper. He wrote about money in franc terms, loans and part-time hours, and the math of trade-offs, but the numbers didn't push out the hope. They lived beside it, honest roommates. There was a paragraph that slowed my reading to a careful crawl. If I tell Mom next Sunday and it doesn't go how I wish, I want to remember this. How today felt on the bridge, how your porch looks in late light, how my chest didn't feel like a closed fist when I said what I wanted to you. I want to practice being the kind of person who can be gentle and brave at the same time. I think those two words are cousins, not opposites. I learned that mostly from watching you. I set the page down and looked around my living room, the scuffed baseboard, the plant I always forget to rotate, the lamp that hums if the bowl isn't screwed just right. How strange and wonderful to see these humble things through his eyes, upgraded to sacred by attention. The photo on the mantel caught the lamplight like it was nodding along. I wrote back right away, not as an answer to a question. He hadn't asked one this time, but as a continuation, the way you step forward in a line that's already in motion. I kept it simple. I told him about the hopscotch girl and the bus driver again, because repetition is how we stitch the days together. I told him the two bravest sentences I know are, "I don't know yet, and this is mine," and that he'd said both this week. I wrote that he could borrow my quiet room as long as he needed, and that I would bring pie, patience, and a willingness to wash dishes while feelings did what they do. When I finished, I folded my letter and tucked it into an envelope I'd saved from a stationery set with small moons in the corners. On the back I wrote, for the bus ride, to be opened when the city feels too loud. I'd slip it to him next week, the same way he'd slipped his first letter to me. No ceremony, just trust. Before bed, I stood at the window a while and tried to name what had changed in me. Not the details of my life. I would still lose my keys and overseason the potatoes and water the fern too little or too much. It was something quieter, a sense that my role had shifted from worrying about the shape of his life to witnessing the strength of its making. The worry didn't vanish. It learned to sit politely while the witnessing spoke. The furnace whispered on. Somewhere a neighbor's dog gave a half yawn of a bark and thought better of it. I turned off the lamp and let the dark return to being what it is, a place for resting, not hiding. On the mantel, the photograph kept its square of light until the room went fully soft. I carried that small brightness with me down the hall, letter in my pocket, and felt the edges of tomorrow line up with a kind of welcome I hadn't known how to name until now.